Garrett Mason, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You were first elected to the Maine Senate in 2010 during the Republican wave election of that year. I think you were 25 at the time. Yeah. After that, you became the majority leader in the Maine Senate, and then ran for governor in 2018. Finished second in that Republican primary. You're running again, obviously, but in between, you've created a public affairs firm, so you've maintained a presence in Augusta, and you're also positioning yourself as someone with experience, whereas a lot of other folks in the field are, positioning themselves as outsiders. Tell me why you think the insider approach is best.
Well, I think first of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys doing the public service you do here. But I think first of all, it's important that people understand that there is a level of experience that you need when you walk into the governor's office. And when you look at the Republican field itself, there's 8 gentlemen in the field, and I'd gladly vote for almost any of them. But I believe in this election, we need somebody who can go in and understand right away what needs to be done to implement the Republican principles that all of us are talking about. Mm-hmm. And I believe I'm the only person that has the relevant life experience to be able to do that right away. As you said, I have a successful public affairs company. My wife and I, we have another construction company that we own. But I've also had the benefit of being able to not only do the business, but do the governing in the legislature. I'm the only living Republican Senate Majority Leader who's held 2 terms back to back as leader. I've negotiated budgets. I've done the things that all of us are talking about. I've actually accomplished them. And I think in this election, we have to have somebody who knows how to do the job right away, and I think that's what makes me different from the rest of the field. Yeah,
to your point, I think I saw you mentioned somewhere, maybe in another forum somewhere else, that it's easy to talk about running state government like a business, but you also have the legislature to deal with. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's a common Republican refrain to talk about how the government needs to be more like a business. Well, I think the government needs to be the government. In a business, your goal is to amplify shareholder value, right? To increase earnings for the shareholder. I don't want the government to have any more money than it absolutely needs to cover basic services. Mm-hmm. You also have a board of directors that's rather large, 186 members. You have to, work through them to implement any lasting change. And for example, when I was in the legislature in 2011 and 2015, we were able to decrease the income tax. That's the only time it's been done in the past 16 years. I know what it takes to get that done. We did that with Democrats, by the way. Mm-hmm. We had Republicans and a majority of Democrats vote to lower the income tax. You go forward into the legislature now, you don't have that going on. You have majority budgets, you have increased spending. All of these things that the other gentlemen on the stage are talking about, I've actually been able to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really important for the next Republican nominee.
This leads to another thing I think you've said recently, and I forget exactly where it was, but it was, I want to under-promise and over-deliver. Yeah. And I've thought about that in the context of cutting the income tax, for example, or even making modifications to state welfare programs. What do you, I guess, does that sort of underscore how difficult it is to say, zero out the income tax? Yeah. And how difficult that may be? And I have another question after that, but sure. just talk about the tension, that it's not as easy as it sounds, is what you're saying.
No, it's not. And the income tax is a significant part of the state budget. And do I believe that Maine people would be better off with no income tax? Yes, I do. It's why I voted and worked to implement getting 70,000 low-income Mainers off the tax rolls entirely. It's why I advocated for those income tax cuts. But even during the LePage years from 2010 to 2018, when I would argue the state was on the right track and doing the right thing, we were only able to reduce the income tax by a little over 1 percentage point. Right now in the legislature, as we're talking, while this is being recorded, there is an effort that's likely to pass to raise the income tax. So we're going to have to go back not only to where we were and where we currently are, but we're going to have to get below that. Mm-hmm. I know how to do that. I've done it before. And I think that, when you say to somebody that you're going to eliminate the income tax over 4 years, well, I don't want to make that promise, because it's very unlikely that could happen. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just an important theory in life, is to underpromise and overdeliver. Mm-hmm. It's just good public relations, something I do know a little bit about. But we are going to make significant progress. Unlike what's going on right now in the legislature with majority budgets, with Democrats playing procedural games amongst Republicans so that they don't have to have their buy-in, I've actually done these things with Democrats, and I know I can do that again. We will work towards reducing to elimination the income tax, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take somebody who can build relationships with people on all pieces of the political spectrum.
Just one more thing on the income tax, and cutting it, like the objective. One proposal in 2014, you were in the majority, I think you were the Senate Majority Leader at the time. Governor LePage proposed a pretty significant cut in the income tax and paid for that by raising the sales tax a little bit, but also extending it to items that were currently exempt, goods and services.
Yep.
Would that be part of your plan, do you think, or would it be different?
I won't go into any kind of detail around how I think we can do it. I think largely I'd like to tackle that through some additional government spending that's gone on, through some expanded Medicaid offerings that's been going on. There's some other things that I think we can cut before we have to go into looking into what kind of tax structure we have. But I can tell you an overarching philosophy that I think is very important when it comes to funding the state budget. I want as many out-of-staters to fund our Maine budget as I possibly can get. I would rather they pay for the bills and the pleasure of being able to come here during tourist season than Maine people. Maine people are getting hammered. You have your income tax, you have your sales tax, you have your property tax, and what the Democrats have done in Augusta over the past 8 years is they've been saying, oh, we're going to lower your property taxes, and that's been nothing of the case. They've been forcing down new mandates to the towns that are unfunded and forcing towns to raise their property taxes. The sales tax hasn't been touched, but the income tax is now being touched after Governor Mills promised that she wouldn't. So I think before we start talking about how are we going to replace revenue, let's talk about how we can decrease expenditures, because increasing the budget 70% over 8 years is, you cannot tell me that there's not waste there. We know that there is.
Where do you think it is? Like, where do you want to look first?
I think DHHS is a huge piece of it. I think we have expanded Medicaid eligibility in a very inappropriate way to places that it doesn't need to be. The childless adult example is one that Republicans frequently reference, and it's true. You shouldn't be able to qualify for that just because you're childless and you're an adult. That's a huge drain on resources. We've also seen extensive examples of fraud being uncovered with home health care services and places of the like. I think there's a lot of things we can go after there. The state auditor just released a report very recently, hundreds of pages long, that talks about all of the mismanaged contracts, no-bid contracts. I heard a story just last night of a state employee who, anytime you bring up going out to bid, it's complete panic because it's just too much work. Well, it's not too much work for the Maine taxpayer to send in their taxes every year. And so we need to make sure that all of these things are being audited. I think that's a big piece of what's missing right now, is that we're simply just doing the same thing over and over again, and that's resulted in higher expenses for Maine people.
One of the things since I've known you and been covering you is that your faith has always been sort of a North Star of your politics.
Yes.
If you're elected governor, how would that influence your approach to policies, and what would that look like?
I mean, my faith is a core piece of who I am. It's something I carry with me every single day. But when you're running for governor, you're not running for, I'm not Catholic, but Pope. You're not running to be the pastor of a church. You're running to be governor. But I think the solid foundation of a Christian faith are the things that I think general society is about. It's love your neighbor as yourself. It's make sure that you're taking care of those around you. It's knowing who the Bible is talking to, right? It's the Bible isn't talking to the government, it's talking to you as an individual person. And I think that's really, it's been influential in my life, and it's been a big piece of how I make decisions in Augusta. It's way more about the individual than the government doing it for you.
Understood. I guess one thing I want to ask just on the government affairs stuff, right? Because I think from your perspective and certainly from other people, it's good to know which levers to pull, how the process works.
Sure.
But for some voters, it may carry a negative connotation, lobbyist.
Yep.
How do you deal with that?
It is funny because I there's other people in the field who have that same title, right, and they'll run away from it. I'm not going to. One of the core tenets of this campaign is that I want to be completely 100% honest about who I am. I've always tried to live my life that way, and in the public eye for the past 16 years, I've always tried to do that. I'm not going to run from the fact that there's public records that said I represented certain companies and organizations. You know, we have wonderful clients, which I won't name here. People can look them up, but they're the people that grow your food. They're the people that build your buildings. You know, as far as like carrying those things into the governor's office, I want to be Maine people's person that can go and get things done for them. And that's what a lobbyist really does at the State House, is they're giving voice to people who might not always have a voice. You know, we also do a lot of pro bono work, so we represent people for no pay at all, because they deserve to have their voices heard in the legislature as well. So, you know, it's nothing that I'm going to run from. It's an asset. You know, one of the things I talk about on the campaign trail is how we need somebody who can go to work with President Trump, with the administration. No matter who is elected in 2026, they're going to have 2 years of President Trump. And I think it's a mistake for Democrats especially to stand there and just say they're going to resist and fight Donald Trump. We need somebody who can actually go work with him, not be him. And the background that I have allows me to do that. I've worked with a lot of people who have the temperament of President Trump. And so I think if you want somebody who can effectively represent Maine, you should hire somebody who's been an effective representative for other people.
I'm glad you brought up the president, because I think you know, there are some of your rivals in the Republican primary field who talk about him quite a bit, maybe try to emulate him in some ways.
Yeah.
You've been pretty critical of that. Can you just talk to me a little bit about why that is?
I just believe in realism. I believe that people should be who they are, not who they want to be, or who people think that they should be. You know, President Trump is one of one. The mold was broken after President Trump arrived on the scene. And just like it was for many other presidents, I don't think that we need to have a look-alike contest. I think that we need to make sure that we're able to work with whoever's in office. I watched Governor LePage, although he was highly critical of President Obama, work with President Obama and the administration. He said some things he may not have probably said, or I wouldn't have said, but you know, he worked with President Obama and got things accomplished for Maine. And that's what I plan to do. And you know, if I am lucky enough to be governor and somebody else gets elected president in 2028 from the opposite party, that's my commitment, as I will continue to work, because Maine is a net receiver. We are taking in more from the federal government than we are sending back to Washington, D.C., and we need input from the federal government. We need contribution. We need help from the federal government in various cases. And I'm going to work with whoever's in the White House, but I'm not going to pretend to be something that I'm not.
Last question. I think you've kind of touched on this in talking about cutting taxes and everything else, but affordability is, you know, obviously a huge issue for voters. Both parties are talking about it. All the candidates are talking about it. Divergent views and how to address it.
Yeah.
Outside of the taxes, what can a governor do to help?
I think one of the things that not a lot of people talk about is the soft power of the bully pulpit, right? Being governor carries with it tremendous gravitas, and it carries with it the ability to summon people and bring them into a room and talk to them about an issue. I think one of the greatest places we could do that is in housing. Housing is, you know, depending on who you ask, 25 to 35% of the average Maine family's budget. And there's a lot of people who are trapped by low interest mortgages that they got in the 2020 timeframe. We have not a lot of housing being built because of restrictions put on by both state and local authorities. You know, I think, you know, there's a lot of people out there that are talking about how we need to build more housing. Well, that's only half of the problem. We need people to have access to capital and be able to access the capital they already have. I think that's one of the big differences too, is one of the first things I want to do as governor is I want to bring in the banks and the credit unions. I want to bring them into the Blaine House and say, listen, we need to make mortgages in Maine portable and saleable so that people can move out of houses that they've outgrown, or be able to move into something smaller down the road or bigger. They need to be able to port their money in a different place. We also need to build more houses. And those things, if you work it from both angles, you're going to be able to move the housing market along and bring prices down, bring prices to an affordable level for Maine people. You know, energy too. You need somebody who can talk to the federal government about how to get more energy into Maine. You need to be able to Go work with President Trump to be able to get American natural gas from the Gulf of America all the way up to Maine, instead of from countries that don't like us very much. You need to be able to have a governor who can go and sue the state of New York and Massachusetts who have stopped pipeline development from increasing energy supply into our state. So I think, beyond the regulations, you need somebody who can go and fight and win because they know how these processes work. And that's what I'm offering, not just Republicans, but Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, all Maine voters, as something different than I think what the other candidates are offering.
Garrett Mason, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.